Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. I am stoked for the topic today because we're going to talk about subscription models, business models that rely on subscription, probably dive into a few nuances and variations on that theme, and some of the real underpinnings that make for a good subscription business versus, some of the tripwires that might be out there. And for this, in addition to my co-host, Kim Scribner, we've got a great guest, and I'm going to let her introduce herself because she's going to do a better job of it than me. Stephanie, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first, Gary and Kim, thanks so much for having me. My name is Stephanie Reccio, and I am a marketing executive that has worked in all kinds of industries, from travel to the food space to sort of utility type shipping services. And I spent a long time on the advertising agency side at the beginning of my career. So I've been lucky enough to work for subscription-based businesses and on subscription-based businesses, but I also have a wealth of surrounding knowledge, and I think that really helps me have a clear point of view on what is something that you would, on a recurring basis, pay out of pocket for, and how will it add value to your life. So excited for the conversation today.
Love that. Love that. And I should say, full disclosure, I've also managed businesses that ran on a subscription basis, and I've coached, founders of startups who had subscription models as well. So I'm excited for the topic because there's so many facets to doing it right. One of the things that I think is maybe a good starting point would be, let's talk a little bit about what makes a subscription, because, in our work with CMG Consulting, we have clients across the spectrum of business models in the for-profit and even in the nonprofit space. And so, for instance, we've got a bunch of membership-driven organizations that are part of our client set. But, we don't think of them as subscriptions per se. And I'm curious, Stephanie and Kim, how you might come at this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think in its broadest form, a subscription is anything that you pay for on a recurring basis. So that's a membership, that is donations that you make on a subscription basis. And that is what is more, I guess, commonly known as a subscription from your subscribe and save on Amazon or your Prime membership to, do you have a subscription to, gosh only knows, your vitamins, your toothbrush, everything we can
Or
talk
the New
about.
York Times.
Right, the New York
Yeah.
Times. We can talk about, there's also a certain amount of subscription fatigue, right? And I think a lot of companies find the notion of building a subscription model into their business as appealing because it's a recurring stream of revenue. I think they also need to consider whether they are up for the task of committing to reducing friction on behalf of their customer on an ongoing basis in exchange for that recurring revenue. And I think that's where the really interesting work within subscription-based businesses comes about. So to me, it's everything from, gym membership, you said New York Times, Netflix, to the single product that I know I use, and I know I use on a recurring basis, and I can project out exactly how often I'll need it, to a whole lot of other things. And I think that for a marketer, it has to be framed as, is the service or product on an ongoing basis reducing net friction, or am I creating cognitive load? Am I creating an emotional burden, right? Am I actually creating anxiety for the end user? And I think that's why that's sort of the cusp upon which subscriptions succeed or fail, right? To me, it's sort of this concept of net friction. A lot of people sign up for it because there's an immediate utility. And then they realize after they've gotten a few shipments, wait a sec, that's actually work. Or I get it and I don't feel good about it either because I spent too much on it, and we can unpack what the variety of other reasons are that create the load. And I think that's where some folks get into subscription-based businesses. I mean, on the provider side, without thinking through whether it's actually sustainable over a long window for folks, and that's where things
Absolutely.
crash out.
Yeah. I think like as you're talking through this, if I think through the subscriptions that I have, gym
Yeah,
membership, Kindle Unlimited, all the things that are on my subscribe and save, certainly all the streaming services that we have available. And when I hear you from a consumer side, when I hear you talking about, does it make my life better or does it add some sort of other thing that I have to do? And when I think about subscribe and save as an example, like sometimes I get to the point where there's way too many trash bin liners that I have in my house. And now I have to figure out how to reduce how often I'm getting trash bin liners, right? So, does it in fact make my life easier to have the subscription, or is it making it more complex in some other way? And like magazine subscriptions would maybe be what, as a younger person, or if we all think about dollar CDs or cassette tapes that we would get from, was it BMG Music back in the day? You'd, like, pay a dollar and you'd now we've all got cases of boxes of CDs laying around that maybe we're just traveling with and not actually listening to based off of the
yeah,
market change. So, yeah, it's interesting to think about the broad array of things that fall into subscriptions.
yeah. And there's this we can figure out when we wanna dive down this portion of the path, but on those, like the CDs or the magazine that you signed up for with the best of intentions to read it every month, or the gym membership, there's also there's that very simple economic concept of sunk cost, where you probably hang on to it a little longer than you maybe should because you've already sunk so much into it. I had this my older daughter took economics one year in college, and they had to pick a real life example for their economics class, and they were talking about sunk costs. I was like, "Your membership to the pool
Yeah.
qualifies, darling. The
Yeah.
one that you never use, but you keep telling me that you don't wanna get rid of it
Yes.
because maybe you'll use it and you've already spent so much money on it." It's a fallacy, right? You're better off letting it go, and if the urge strikes you to do it again, get it again, and figure out how to do it that way. So that's an interesting facet of the whole subscription conversation too. And I think a lot of businesses are banking on you doing that,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And it's this self-talk of maintaining optionality
Yeah.
by perpetuating the investment. And, that's part of what gives a subscription model in some ways an inherent challenge from a reputation standpoint because, you know, there was a period not so long ago when sample boxes by mail were all the rage. And, some of those services actually deliver good value and people feel good about them. A lot of them rely on gift giving season to sign people up and basically for a third party to get the goods and the original person to sort of lose sight of it. And I think that starts to feel a little dubious for some folks when they realize after having given a gift for a birthday present or at the winter holidays that they're getting a charge at some point in the next year or after the initial 3-month cycle. And, you know, if you're not checking your credit card statements or your checking account, you may not realize it. And I think for me, and I'm curious, Stephanie, how you've come across this, that's part of what gives this subscription model such a taint in some people's eyes, even when the concept comes up. And so I'll stop there because I'm curious about your perspective.
Yeah, I think this is very top of mind for me, because I think it's one of the most critical facets of trust for a subscription is the reminder ecosystem, right? So obviously there are laws around longer term subscriptions. I think it's and I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's anything that's over 6 months and you have to send a reminder. There are a lot of subscriptions that operate on a higher frequency that are able to take advantage of a loophole that they don't have to send the reminders. So those are weekly subscriptions or even some monthly subscriptions, although I think those laws are changing in some states. And there's this interesting dynamic that happens on the business side of things where when you send the reminder, of course, a few things happen. Skipping the week or the month happens, canceling outright happens, or continuing, with modifications or whatever that happens as well. And if you're only looking at the business result from, say, you're looking at LTV to CAC, right? You want the long-term value off of the subscription. That's why you do the subscription model. That's baked into the mathematics behind the offering, and you're baking in the cost to acquire that customer. Sometimes the window of view is too short to realize the long-term detriment of not sending
Yes.
those reminders, because you're inevitably going to create friction for the customer who has forgotten, who was away unexpectedly and didn't get it and therefore couldn't use it, or that it, depending on the type of service or membership, that we're talking about, it just sailed right over their head. They didn't, the magazine arrived in the mail or the newspaper, or, at worst, a box of food arrived on your doorstep and you weren't there, kind of thing. And there is a cost to that over a longer window. And there's also an immediate cost because it
Hmm.
creates inbound to your care team, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I think it's a matter of how you do the math. And is one of your primary objectives? I understand completely the desire to avoid the reminder because it results in those negative actions. But are you actually putting the customer first? And is your scope of view to the cost of the action broad enough?
I mean, we've certainly heard clients say, I don't want to send the reminder because people might cancel,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, and how do how do you get around that? And certainly, I'll use a recent example for me, like Loom deodorant. You can order on
Mhm.
a subscription
Yep.
service. However, they send you a text message that says, what do you want to do? Do you want to get your subscription? Do you want to postpone it? Do you want to cancel it all out? What's the date? And they make it frictionless for me to make those decisions, which means I'm not outright canceling it because they're making it easy to modify.
Yeah. And that has your trust, right? And I think that to me, I want to be the representative of that business that is in it for the trust building, in addition to delivering the service, right? Like you're talking about, if we sort of set it up as an equation of the things that you're doing to build a long-term relationship, right? It has to be the convenience of getting it. It has to be the quality of the good. Trust is on that top line, right, on the numerator. And then the denominator is all of the load things. How much work do I have to do to maintain it? What's the actual cost of it? Because sometimes, as much as you might love something, when you realize you're spending $50 a month or
Yes.
whatever on something, you're like, wait, the math on that actually doesn't work as much as I love
No.
it. And there are lots of things that go on that denominator line. One of the things for me, and this is where I can, sort of dissect Amazon as a relationship, is I don't actually love the boxes on my doorstep. It's like stresses me out somehow,
Mhm.
right? There's the environmental impact, but it's like, oh, okay, now I got to unpack this stuff and I don't know what to do. However, what's on the numerator so far
Yes.
outweighs what's on the
Yep.
denominator for me. Like the beauty, the magic of getting what I need in a couple of days without having to drive all over the place to try to find it so far outweighs my stress about the boxes, or the fact that I can say what I want to say about all of these big tech titans and their ways. The math still works out in favor of keeping it.
Yep. And I want to sort of go back to one or two of the points that was made just before that. I love the numerator denominator model, and I think that's super helpful. When we talk about attrition on a subscription model, there's this hesitancy to sort of recognize that that's part of playing the game. And there's a time horizon element when running a subscription service. When somebody says, well, I don't want to send the reminder because somebody might actually choose to opt out. Well, the net effect of not sending the reminder is actually putting additional drag on your new customer acquisition. And at a certain tipping point, you've gone too far down that untrustworthy scale for your investment in new subscribers to actually pay off. And that's been the death knell of a number of startups in the space because, they get into this, but then they earn the reputation of duping people. And, one of the subscriptions that I ran in the past was actually navigation aids for people with RVs. Because if you just use Google Maps, you'll shear the air conditioning unit off your big motorhome, right? And it sounds like a pretty esoteric space. We compartmentalized our business such that if you're renting one of these beasts, don't subscribe. We were pretty upfront with people. If you only need this for 2 weeks for a vacation, we have a package for you. If you live in this thing or you are a frequent traveler, we have this other package and it is a subscription. And the value proposition was right out front, but it helped us maintain, we used to talk about the fact we wanted a Saab type model for the subscription. And Saab had the benefit of, 90+% of Saab owners bought another Saab. We wanted our subscribers to be a tight core of dedicated people who said, this is really valuable. But we knew that there were limits. We weren't going to turn that into 5x the number of people subscribing. And I'm curious, Stephanie, in your experience, how you calibrate on that as well, because oftentimes subscription models show up right alongside another method of delivering the goods and services. It's not a whole dedication, our only way of giving you this content, product, service support is through subscription. There are alternatives there. What are some of the factors that say, yeah, subscription might actually be a good deal for us?
Yeah, I think I think a subscription is a good path to get into where the need for the product or service is consistent, obviously, right? Kim, the Lumi example, the deodorant example, how often I'm on a deodorant subscription myself. Like I know exactly how fast I'm going to go through it. I know the value of it because I found a product that I actually really like that works for me. So the efficacy is there. I don't mind paying a premium for it because it's a product that I like. So it doesn't even have to employ that subscription method that Amazon does where you save because that you bundle it with other things. That doesn't necessarily matter to me. So I think and am I creating load for somebody in the decision-making process, right? You and I, we could unpack the subscribe and save. Sometimes it is load, like, oh my God, how many trash bags do I
Right.
need? I'm not going through them fast enough. So I'm going to actually change how quickly I get them. I think, and it's also habit forming, which I know
Yes.
is like the magic that everybody's looking for in the subscription is creating the habit or keying into your desire to build a habit. So if we looked at a Peloton or a gym membership or those types of things, they're number one, they're doing the math 2 ways. They're anticipating that not everybody's going to use it.
Well, they
That's
look at that
part of
breakage
the
every day.
math, right? That's
Yep.
a gift for them. But they also want the evangelists, the people who do build the habit, who love it, who will speak the word,
Yeah.
and gather more followers for it. So there's like two-sided math there, but it's something that is habit forming, that reduces friction, that builds a habit. If you're talking about something that's episodic, Gary, what you were just talking about with the navigation, that's
Mm-hmm.
episodic, right? I'm doing that when,
Mm-hmm.
say, RVs are my thing, and I do that every time I go on vacation. But I only go on vacation 2 or 3 times a year. So, that's the perfect model for something like that, where maybe when I retire, I become a full-time RVer, or maybe I have a life change and I decide that that's going to be my little house on wheels instead of living in a house that's tethered to the ground, right? So
Yes.
but I think that a lot of times the decision about whether to have those 2 paths, the subscription and the ability to purchase on the one-off, are to build a relationship with you when your need is not consistent. And I think that that's incredibly smart. I think that's the hard part with some subscriptions where they very intentionally, it's sort of, we're back to the reminder conversation in a way. They very intentionally are not offering a single purchase path because they're worried that it won't grab you, that it won't become habit forming, that you won't see it as a need. And I think there's such a twisted logic in there. A lot of those types of subscriptions are highly incentivized,
Mhm.
right? Because they want you to use it, um, meal kits are a perfect example, right?
Yes.
Get the first 5 boxes for $100, but you don't get, it's something that you have to do the first 5 shipments in order to realize the discount. There's such in a strange way. Well, first of all, you're making it complicated. That's friction on the acquisition front to begin with, because that's complicated for the average person to figure out. But you're also signaling a lack of trust in the quality of the product by not offering people the opportunity to trial it. And maybe you are, in a way, you effectively are offering them to trial it, but you have to opt out then, or else you do get charged for it. So there's some things mechanically that I think are a bit dubious, which I know are done. Those decisions are made for the benefit of the economics of the business, but I don't think that they serve the customer in terms of their experience with the brand.
And I think as listen to the two of you talking through this, it's that brand experience has to be the same whether you're the one-time buyer or the subscribed buyer. And yeah, and you've got to be communicating with your subscribers. So you don't want like maybe old way of thinking was just get them to sign up for the subscription and then don't talk to them at all so they completely forget that they're paying for this thing. In times before, like now there's tools that can run through your bank account and tell you subscriptions you forgot about. Those
Mhm.
things didn't exist 5 years ago, maybe. Um, but if you're not providing the same user experience to the people who are consistently paying you every single month as you are to the one-time buyer, you're also diminishing that trust that you all were talking.
Yeah. The funny thing about those services too is that those services are another subscription, right?
Yes.
The ones that run through and audit. And a specific challenge that I have with those is that there is some work involved for you, right? You have to grant access. You have to make sure that the paths of access remain open because,
Your bank account
you're
gets unlinked, what
yeah,
have you. Yes.
your bank doesn't like giving
Right.
access to a third
Yeah.
party app. So every once in a while they're going to boot it off and you're going to have to re-verify that that connection is valid. So
Yes.
there's work involved in doing it. And if you don't have everything connected to one credit card or one bank account, then it gets even more complicated because it's a layering
Right.
effect.
So
And
then
then
it's
you're
like
paying,
choosing as a consumer, you're put in the position to have to choose
right,
the lesser of two evils, so to speak, right? So,
right.
like I know in my case, at one point I used one of those services, but I used it for 3 months and then I stopped using it because I got all my subscriptions all cleared
Right.
up,
You
right?
you gained
Correct.
awareness, right? The
Correct.
aperture
Yes.
opened on what you were spending money on, and then you can close the aperture knowing that you're aware now of what the things are. And I think that that's a beautiful thing and potentially a beautiful model for some of those to consider. It's not recurring revenue. The venture capital
Yeah.
company that invested in the business won't love it because it's not recurring revenue, but you'll gain such trust from the consumers that use you that they'd be more willing to come back next year if it's their
Right.
annual New Year's
Subscription
resolution
cleanup.
to
Yes.
do a cleanup. I'm going to
Or
do a
yes.
cleanup every January and I'm going to pay you every January to help me gain that visibility. Open up my eyes to what I've been spending money on. That's potentially a beautiful thing. But it's hard from a business perspective to take that view when what finance is looking at and what the investors are looking at is the recurring stream. However, if you look at retention through the right lens, you're seeing that retention drops off and it drops off for very, cogent,
Specific
logical,
reasons. Yeah.
specific emotional reasons that you can actually, deal with, which goes back to that net friction, right? All of a sudden I realize I'm spending money on it. I realize that it's work. I feel like I've done what I need to do, going to the tracking model. And so it's interesting. I mean, there's a converse to that too, right? If you can look at your base of users on a subscription and you can say, if I get the person from 3 shipments to 4 shipments, they're sticky, right? Like if you do the cohort analysis and you're like, if I can get people over that hurdle from the third one to the fourth one, and then am I willing to incentivize them to get over that hurdle? Yeah, I am, because if it makes you sticky, if I can see, if the math lays out that on average, the people that get 4 shipments are way more sticky than people who get 3 shipments, then yeah, that's a place to, use marketing intelligently to get them over that hurdle to make it sticky. But big but, you still have to have the trust in the relationship, right? You can't then say, "Oh, I don't care if they use it after the fourth one." You know, Godspeed to you all. I'm not going to worry about you. I
Yeah,
just
you
want you
still
to
have
keep
to
the
keep them
subscription
engaged and make sure they understand the benefits
right.
of the product they're subscribed to. I cannot wait for what Gary's about to say next. And
because
here's
she
why.
knows.
I know he hates the word sticky. And
Um,
so I'm just
And
like,
hit
ooh,
me
how's
with it.
this
Come
going
on,
to come out?
hit me with
and
it. I love it.
the reason that I do is because sticky implies stuck.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if a
Has a negative
consumer, a
connotation.
user feels like they are stuck, right? And, I was part of putting Blockbuster out of business, running marketing for a competitor that took a ton of market share from them. And they had a sticky business model, right? Their whole path to profit was you break our rules and we make you pay. But for many years, they were the only outlet in town. So if you wanted to rent a movie, that's where you went. And, I love the idea of building commitment. And, Kim is chuckling internally because she's heard this spiel before. The interesting thing, it does come back down to trust and the manifestations of it. And Kim and Stephanie, you both touched on this idea of treating your customers, treating your users commensurately, whether they're on a subscription or not. And we talked about, a lot in the subscription space. Nowadays, the joy with a non-subscriber is sometimes you have the opportunity to say episodically, hey, this is the third time you're back in this period of time. We could save you money if. And there's a variation on that even within the subscriber base that says, based on your usage, we're paying attention. We'd like to calibrate where you're at. We can actually take you down a level in what you're paying based on your utilization. We could boost you up a level and give you access to these other things. And the feedback loops there between data and customer care and the proposition itself, reputationally, yield dividends for a long time to come. And I'm curious as you're thinking about it, Stephanie, and even if you want to talk about people getting stickier, I'm good with it. I'll just twitch a little. But I'm curious how you think about that role of data and service in this subscription or membership opt-in space.
Yeah, so first I'll say I love the reframe away from sticky. So if you go back to the beginning of our conversation where we were talking about, essentially a subscription is a commitment to a relationship with a
Yes.
brand, right? That has cognitive load, that has emotional load, right? You feel a certain way when it arrives on your doorstep. So I love the reframe away from sticky and towards commitment, because it's not, the fly comes to the spider's lair and gets stuck in the web. It's not that at all. And I think that is the way that some companies think about it. We've hit on, it doesn't matter if they use it or not. Maybe they forget about it and that's okay. There's an assumption that they won't use. These are all ill-begotten gains, right? And from a trust perspective. And so I think that reframe is incredibly helpful, because you are setting up a model based on having an ongoing relationship with a customer, right? It's not an entrapment. And I do think that reputationally, and for a variety of other reasons that we've talked about, all those negatives add up over time. The point that you were making about using data wisely to identify where the opportunities are, I think is exactly what companies should be doing. I think similar to what you were describing, where you have an episodic user that uses once a month for 3 to 6 months, and you see that person as an opportunity for outreach to either give them more value via price reduction or more product if they can use more product. I think that is exactly how we should be conversing with customers. Or let's say if it's let's go down the SaaS path, right? And you see that somebody's never using some some feature,
Haven't
right?
logged in 90 days,
Yeah, they
whatever
haven't
it is.
logged in 90 days. I was chatting with a friend yesterday in the education space about this because the service that she works on is a service for teachers where a lot of people download it and they use it, and then there's some confusion, and then they never log in again, and they might be paying for it or they might not be paying for it. There are obviously different paths that you have to go down. That to me is an educate. We talked a lot about education, the opportunity for education there. Why aren't they using that? Sometimes it's even just awareness. They're using the one feature set every day, but there's a whole other feature set that could help them. So this is where you're talking about the relationship building, communication, education, product marketing, soliciting feedback in loops, identifying those opportunities for people. So I think I'm such a huge advocate for having a one-time path versus the subscription path, because that sets up the criteria. And I know a lot of businesses don't like that math. However, if you're looking at it from over a long enough window, you're likely seeing the benefits of it. I'm going to keep coming back to the deodorant because the deodorant actually does that. I don't know if Lumi does that, but maybe they do. But my subscription offers that path. Just try
Yeah.
us. Just
Yep.
buy it. Buy it a couple of times. Buy 3 different scents. We don't care. Like, you do you.
Yeah.
And then you decide whether or not you want to be on the subscription, which is, I think, great, versus the one that locks you in sight unseen. This is the only way to try it, and then you have to opt
Absolutely.
out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a
And a-
client that we've worked with that's in, I would say, a subscription based product, but they don't automatically sell it that way. So it's two-way humidity control for tobacco, cannabis, wood instruments, and dry foods. And when you buy it the first time, there's a checkbox, and you can say, I want to sign up for repeat subscriptions. But they have an opportunity and a job really to sell people on, you're going to need more than one of these once they buy the first one, right? So that continued education of the consumer of why that's a new market space also. So there's education that has to go along with that of it's not just buying your humidor for your cigars. You also need this other thing that's going to help your cigars be better than they are today.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
And
Yeah.
it gets into nuances of the value proposition then. So in that
Mhm.
client's case, there's essentially an expiry on the product's efficacy. So helping people understand that time frame and
Yeah, the
remind them
education.
about it. And
Because some people will think, oh, I have this now. It's not.
correct.
I'm
And
good.
the
Don't worry about me.
and
No?
the other aspect is, and Stephanie, you touched on this. I've lived this where we did a bunch of inquiry, trying to be empathetic with our users about what they appreciated. And in this one example I'm thinking of, we had a massively valuable attribute that almost none of our loyal users knew about. And so when we started to tell them about it, it was pretty amazing. As soon as we started to tell them about it, we saw our net promoter score start to go up. So our customer acquisition numbers actually got better, and we tripled the use of our website because it was so additive to their user experience. All of a sudden, we had this much larger audience coming and engaging, not just with the utility that we offered there, but
Yeah.
also with other content, et cetera. So this idea of, again, one of the joys of a subscription done well is there is a longer term, less transactional opportunity to relate to the users. I used to subscribe to 40-pound bags of kitty litter. Why? Because I didn't want to schlep them across a parking lot. And so they'd come to my doorstep. But the service that was providing it did a good job, asking me questions, and lo and behold, then I ended up subscribing to other stuff as well.
Yeah.
And not because they were giving me the hard sell, but they were just asking questions and learning, and then the offers sort of showed up in the appropriate manner at the appropriate time.
Yeah.
Um,
It's so interesting because at its core, I think a lot of this goes to, and this is such a vastly overused um, phrase, but customer centricity, right? It almost makes you
yes,
have a, you almost twitch, right, when you hear it because people use it in such a sort of superficial way. Like, oh, we're customer centric, we're solving a customer's problem. But if you really are putting the customer at the center of the ecosystem that you're running, you're making decisions a certain way about how you're going to manage your ongoing relationship with them, whether they're buying from you once or whether they're buying from you every month. And it's so interesting to me that brands that tout customer centricity are very often making decisions from a financially centric place. And I understand people are running a business. I am not naive.
absolutely.
However, there are paths to long-term success. Like I think this to me goes to short-term, long-term, the need to
Yes,
have both. And this, as time goes on, the over focusing on the short term versus the long term, for companies that are backed by investors, a lot of it is with the eye to the exit, not with the eye to the building a viable long-term company. And I think that that's a real shame for your customers. And I think the thing that folks aren't realizing is that you're you're acting to your own detriment, right? The
I mean,
thing
and
that you need
it
most is
can
the thing
defeat the
that you're
brand.
deciding against.
Yeah, and, like, I think about some supplements that maybe I would like, "Oh, I'm gonna try this thing. I saw it on Instagram and it looks interesting. I'm gonna sign up for it. I'm gonna try it," thinking I can cancel quickly if it's not the thing for me or what have you. And then it becomes incredibly difficult to cancel, and then I tell everybody I know, "Don't ever sign up for this subscription
correct.
Yeah.
service. You'll never be able to get out of it." And then it's
Yeah.
brand damaging for the long term, to your point.
Yeah. Versus the supplement that either lets you buy the first bottle, like they'll tell you you need to use it for 60 days to really understand whether you get the benefit of it. So, try to keep that in mind when you make your first purchase. Then you can come back to the subscription if you want to, or it's a one-click unsubscribe if you want to, versus having to jump through all of the loopholes to get there.
Already envisioning at least two more podcast episodes. One is about the power of proper sampling, right?
Yeah.
And the personal care business that I ran many years ago built itself over time with astute sampling efforts, understanding the needs when the needs arose with our consumers and allowing them to get one free and then build from there. I think the other is sort of playing back something you just touched on, Stephanie, with my own words, which is manifesting empathy, which I like a little bit more than customer centricity, because I
Yeah.
think customer centricity has become almost a trope that
I
people
agree
just
with you.
throw it around.
Yeah.
And but when we take empathy and we manifest it through our behaviors, and there's visibility and transparency to how the responses that users have provided actually turn into change, turn into a different value proposition, that
Yeah.
evolution becomes a path to high commitment relationships. And, I could see that being, part of some future conversations. I recognize how long we've been talking, and I'm sure we could keep talking for a long time. I do want to ask Stephanie, as you came into this with our invitation, was there anything that you were like, oh, I sure hope I get to tell this story that we haven't allowed you to do yet, where you're like, oh, yeah, I want to get this point across, or something that's arisen while we've been talking where you're like, oh, you know what, before we finish this up, we should definitely touch on this?
I don't think so. I think the main thing that I was hoping to talk about, which we have talked about, is that perspective of looking at the net impact of the subscription, right? The net friction. What have you solved for versus what friction have you created? There's absolutely friction in subscriptions, whether it's the packaging, the boxing, the cost of it, do you have porch pirates? My goodness, are people stealing things from your front step? There is all kinds of friction. Is the value being delivered more than the friction that is being created? That is the magic. That's the goal. And I do think, you said the reframe on customer centricity is empathy. I think we could do a whole episode on marketing
Oh,
jargon and
I would love it.
reframing marketing jargon, because I completely agree with you. Empathy again speaks to, if you're offering a subscription, you're making a commitment to, on an ongoing basis, reduce friction for your
Yes.
customers. Are you up to the task of doing
Yes.
that? And if you are not willing to look at every facet of the decision making in that regard, retention is going to be a problem for you in one way or another, and you're going to have to deal with it. So I'm so glad we got to that, because I think that is really the heart of the matter with subscriptions and memberships.
And to me, the magic in what you just shared is the insight. The front end of a subscription service is actually pretty easy to implement. The hard part, the heavy lift, is the long-term viability.
Yes.
And that might be a good place for us to draw a line under this. Stephanie, I can't thank you enough for coming in.
Yeah,
I hope
thank
we
you
get to
guys.
do
So
another
fun.
one of these in the near future. Kim, as always, thank you so much. And for everybody who listened, thanks for tuning into this episode of The Fault Line, CMG Consulting's podcast. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts, or follow us on LinkedIn, or just come to cmgconsulting.com and get access there. Thank you so much.